What is up, y'all? Welcome back to Rough Drafts. My name is Sam Pratt. This week I'm going to be talking a little bit about the data. I think that this episode is going to end up being a little bit shorter. I'm a little pressed for time. I just finished moving over the weekend, and in 1 week from today, I will be on a plane to Europe for a week. So I'm actually recording 3 episodes this week, and I'm pretty busy. I think it'll be nice to have a little bit more of an abstract topic. So I'm going to cover a couple of points about how I use the data, my relationship to the data, just discussing the data in general. I'm a big data guy. I use 17 lands all the time. I love to check the early days of the stats. I think it's really exciting when they come out. It sort of gives a big picture of the format, sort of sets the base level of what we're going to be digging into. I think that I have a fairly responsible relationship to the data. And I also think there are a lot of pitfalls with all the things that 17 lands data offers you. And I think a lot of people have irresponsible relationships to the data and how people talk about it. So that's some of the things I want to dig into this week. I'm going to start off with a lot of the positives, though. Having access to this large data set, thanks to 17 lands, has changed limited in a lot of different ways. And one of the big positives that I would say is that the limited player base has gotten significantly better as a whole. Having a very unified source of information with an incredibly large sample size just makes it a lot easier for people to adjust their baseline card evaluation and avoid making very easy, obvious card evaluation mistakes that I think people made a lot before there was this big public data set available. I think with the data, it is incredibly easy to get a big picture look at the format. And that's not something that was available 5 years ago. You would have to go to content creators or talk to people, which I do think talking to people is great about Magic, but it's just way easier to get a very ground level, big picture overview of a certain format with this big data set. You can very easily just log on to 17lands.com. You get a very quick hit view of color balance, like which colors are good, which colors are bad, which decks are performing well. You get a very cursory look at which cards are performing best. You can very quickly adjust your baseline card evaluation. It's a really incredible resource for both new players, players that are new to limited, or people that are jumping into a format late in the format for the first time. Maybe it's a flashback draft. Maybe they just took a week off when the format started. I know a lot of pros playing in a pro tour that might be like week 2 or 3. If they are ill prepared for limited, they use the data as a way to get caught up on what the format is about. I think all of these things, the accessibility of getting good at limited is so much better than it was 5 years ago. And I think that's a huge boon of the data. Also, for more advanced players, I think it's a fantastic discovery tool. The anecdote that I really like talking about is the card Vampire Spawn, which is a card from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. This is just 3 mana, 2/3 when it enters Drain 2. And basically nobody had this on their radar pre-release. And this is one of the first sets where the data had like a big enough sample size to be like really useful early on. And in the first day or two, Vampire Spawn was performing really well. It was one of the best black commons, one of the best commons in the set. And everyone was like, oh, that's just, small sample size. Like it'll adjust back out. Vampire Spawn's not going to be a top common. And it just stayed there. And this is something that people really overlooked because it's not flashy. It doesn't do anything synergistic. It's just kind of like this generic card and people were writing it off. And it turns out that this effect is just like kind of good. Like the life buffer on a pretty reasonable body is just something that every deck should be interested in filling their curve with. I think it's a really cool tool for challenging your own biases as a card evaluator because we're handed this brand new puzzle every 2 months. And a lot of our card evaluation heuristics are based off old sets in old contexts. Like this type of card is not a card that worked well in this format. That's going to influence our card evaluation for future sets. But in a new environment, when the cards are a little bit different, we haven't played with them, it's really cool that we have like this more objective tool of card evaluation that gives us like an aggregate win rate. I also use the data a lot for digging into certain archetypes that I haven't played before. Say in a format I haven't ever drafted red-green. I don't know why I would get into red-green. I don't really know what good red-green decks look like. I can very easily go to the trophy decks tab. I can look at past red-green decks that have trophied. I can sort the win rate data data for just red-green decks, and I can see what's performing well. So it's a very good learning tool, and I think it's an excellent source of information. I'm going to switch over to some of the pitfalls about the data and why I think there are a lot of negative feelings with certain people about the data. And I think it's not usually about the actual information that's being presented. I know some people don't like that it quote unquote solves formats faster, but I think the benefit of making limited more accessible to people outweighs that factor. I think a lot of people take issue with the discourse around the data as it pertains to card evaluation in context. It's more about how people are responding to the data than the data itself. Ben from Lords of Limited is a notorious data hater. But one thing that he said when he was sort of explaining himself on one episode, I can't remember what episode it was that people like to use the data to prove themselves right and like to use the data to try to end arguments. So they'll have a certain card evaluation and the data matches their own card evaluation, and they kind of say, well, the data backs me up, so I must be right. When I actually think the data is a much more useful tool for challenging your own biases and challenging your own card evaluations. If you disagree with the aggregate win rate, you might want to say, what is the context that I'm seeing that makes this card either perform better than the aggregate win rate, or a card that I don't like that is performing well in the aggregate win rate? I think that the data is an excellent tool for opening up discussion about format big picture and card evaluation, rather than trying to use it as a tool to win an argument. And I think that's where people get really annoying about it, is just saying like, well, the data backs me up. Here you go. Here's evidence that I'm right. I don't really think that's how we should be responding to this really valuable resource. And the really big issue that I have with people's use of the data is when people try to translate the win rate rankings into a pick order. Obviously, I do think that the aggregate like game in hand win rate data does translate to a pretty good pick order for exactly pick one in the draft. But draft is so contextual. It's based on what you've already taken, what type of deck you're playing, what color pair you're in, what specific roles does your deck need filled, what are your own preferences in draft. I do believe that at its core, draft is much closer to an art than a science. There are elements of both, of course, and I think that having some objectivity is really useful. But I think that draft becomes so contextual that these win rate rankings really break down in certain scenarios, and I think can act as more harm than good in a lot of areas too. One of the biggest data pitfalls I see is people comparing cards in different colors. Now, I want to back up for a second and talk about how exactly win rate is calculated, like how the game in hand win rate on 17lands.com is calculated, because I think this is going to be important for a couple points that I'm going to talk about today. It's helpful to just think about how this statistic is calculated. So when you win a game, you can think of any individual card as getting 1 point. So when you complete your game and you won, each individual card's win rate that you drew over the course of the game gets 1 point towards its aggregate win rate. And when you lose a game, it gets 0. And it totals up for each card the number of games that you had the card in your hand and won or lost. And that's the average. Each win rate for each individual card is not on an island. It's not independent of other factors. It is in fact extremely dependent on all of the other cards in your deck. And specifically, if you consider all of the other cards in your deck, cards are most often played with cards of the same color. And this is why when you see a color is winning a lot in a format, like a color is a very strong color, all of the cards of that color are going to have a higher relative win rate than the cards in colors that are performing poorly. So just as an example, you can take a card like Sold Out. Sold Out currently has a 56.7% game in hand win rate in Avatar. Obviously, black is performing pretty poorly in Avatar, and you can compare this to Yip Yip, which is a white common that has a game in hand win rate of 56.8. That's actually performing better than Sold Out. But I hope that no one is actually taking Yip Yip ahead of Sold Out. It's just performing better because it's in white decks that are winning more than black decks. You obviously think of each of these commons very differently in context. Like Sold Out is maybe the best black common. I would probably have Deadly Precision ahead of it, but you take Sold Out kind of higher than all the other black commons when you're in black, and you're not getting into white for Yip Yip at all. They're just like very different cards in context. This is a pretty extreme example, but this is something that I think about a lot when I'm parsing the win rate data. Is I look at the win rates in conversation with the other cards in that color. And I like to view it more as a power ranking of like each common within that color. So if you just sort by commons, you're looking at the ones that are sort of at the top as standing out to you. And then if there's like a big gap, you know that, oh, these commons in this color are like the important ones, and then the rest kind of like don't matter. I think the individual win rate data is more directionally correct than it is specifically correct. I think it's pretty important to have like a rough view of what the best commons per color are, have like a rough ranking of those. But commons are so contextual in 2025 in play boosters that I don't even think that common rankings matter that much. Like, it's important to have a roster of the top couple that you like, that you sort of take as signals to get into a certain color, but you're usually not making picks between different commons in a vacuum. Like, there are so many higher rarity cards in your draft in each pack that I find when I'm taking commons and comparing commons with one another, there's a lot more context that comes up. And I think it's more important than actually knowing which commons perform better than others to understand that the roles that each given common can fill for your deck and how well it fills those roles. I think this philosophy of being more flexible about the actual individual rankings between the cards also translates well to higher rarities. It's kind of more important for me to get a general vibe of, oh, these commons are really worth taking super early. These uncommons are reasons to get into a color. This color pair cares about this thing, and this uncommon is really important to that. Then sort of nitpicking like, oh, this uncommon is performing like a 0.5 percentage point better than this one. Like that doesn't really matter to me when I'm actually navigating my draft seed. In general, I like to view the data more like homework. It's a lot of really good information that can influence your big picture overview of the format. And then drafting is like actually taking the test. And while you can get like decently far just picking straight up by game in hand win rate and like navigating into your seat like that, I've had a lot more success finding my way in a format when I have like this very good, solid philosophical view of what the format is all about and making decisions based on that rather than nitpicking the individual win rates of the cards. So let's get into actually talking about an avatar card. The title of this episode is Lost Days, and I do want to talk about this card because it's performing as the number one common in the set by like a decent margin too. It's currently 58.8% gaming hand win rate, which is about a 0.5 percentage more than Firebending Lesson. Now, I think the community has correctly picked out that this card is not actually the best common in the set. I haven't seen anyone actually arguing that they're picking it higher than Firebending Lesson or anything else, but I do want to unpack this card a little bit. Like I've been saying, I think it is very relevant that this card is performing well. I think that's what you should be taking away from the individual gaming hand win rate of this card, is that this card should be in conversation for some of the best commons in the set. And I think it's directionally in the top whatever blue commons. So I would say like Watery Grass, Fortune Teller, Quench, and Lost Days are all sort of like in conversation for the best blue commons. But I'm very rarely just like taking a blue common as my first blue card. It's so much more often in conversation with what I've already taken in the draft, how deep into blue I am. And these 4 different cards fill very different roles in your deck. Like Lost Days is kind of a clunky 5-drop, and you don't want to load up on those too early. So the position of these 4 commons really depends on what's already happened in the draft. A couple individual problems with this card and its game in hand win rate. One is that the lower a card is taken in the draft, sort of the higher its average last seen at, which is a different statistic on 17 lands, the better its win rate will become. I think this doesn't really matter as much as people think because, like I said, the actual individual rankings of the cards doesn't really matter. But I do think it's worth noting when you have to spend a higher draft pick on a card, that does have like a penalty on your deck's win rate. And a card that you can spend a lower pick on that still performs really well is going to get like a bump in the overall deck win rate in general, because your deck can get stronger picks later in the draft. So Lost Days is currently picked average last seen at 5.26, which is the 21st highest pick common in the set, which is a lot lower than its physician. So if people were taking Lost Days as highly as they took Firebending Lesson, its win rate would definitely go down. The other thing with this card is a more complicated point that I want to map out. This all came from someone named Danelius in the Limited Level Ups Discord, who for the past like couple years has been posting really good like deep dives on data. And one thing that he has observed, sort of like discovered in going deep on the data over the past couple of years, is that blue, by nature of what it gets to do in the color pie and what blue decks usually look like, gets a game in hand inflation. So this is kind of complicated, but this is going to go back to the point I made about when you win a game, all of the cards that you drew for that game get like 1 point when you're calculating game in hand win rate. And when you lose a game, all of the cards that you draw get like a 0. When a blue deck wins the game, it is usually because they were able to draw a lot of cards and make the game go long. That's not always the case, but that's generally just like what blue does in Magic. Is it likes the game to go long because blue gets the best card advantage. Blue's often seeing a lot more of its deck. When an aggro deck wins a game, they're usually winning on like what, turn 6, 7, something like that. That means that you only see about the top 15 cards of your deck or so. So 15 cards get a point. When a blue deck wins the game, it's usually because it sees extra cards. That's just what blue gets to do. And oftentimes that means seeing like 20 cards in your deck, 25 cards in your deck. That means when blue wins, when it sees a lot more cards, all of those cards disproportionately get inflated by game in hand win rate. So this causes a sort of inflation of blue cards win rates, just because of how these win rates are calculated. Obviously, everything is still contextual, and I think this is another point into taking every piece of data more directionally. Lost Days is even going to let you see more cards because it creates a clue token. And like I said, it's really important to know which blue commons are performing well, so you can focus on taking those in the draft higher. So the important part is that Lost Days is performing well, but it's just worth noting that compared to the other colors, blue gets this slight game in hand win rate bump. And if you want to drill deeper into the data, you can sort not just by every card you draw in a given game, you can sort by opening hand win rate. So when you win a game, a point goes only to the cards that were in your opening hand. And that sets everything on a much more even playing field. Obviously, this is not a perfect metric. And like I said, you don't want to translate these individual card win rates into a pick order. That's not really the point of all this. But opening hand can be a really fantastic way to learn about which cards are really performing well. A card like Quench is a card that is going to perform very, very well in your opener and get worse the longer the game goes on. But a lot of times in these slower blue decks, you really need to nail the early game to get to the long game. It's kind of easy to win a long game with a blue deck. It's not easy to win a game where your opponent's pressuring you. So including more high priority opening hand cards can be a really effective tool in building your control decks. And I'll bring up Quench again. Quench is the 4th best performing opening hand common, significantly better than any of the other blue cards. The next one is Forecasting Fortune Teller, and Quench has about a 1.5% above Forecasting Fortune Teller. So if you want to go a little bit deeper on the data, see if you can find some more observations. I really like sorting by opening hand and comparing that to the win rates of game in hand or even games drawn, which is basically the counterpart of opening hand. It's like all of the cards you drew in the game, not excluding your opening hand. If you're just trying to get quick hit, big picture format, I think game in hand is fine. If you're going deeper, 17 Lands has so many cool filters that you can use, just really like mapping out what cards are performing where, when, why, all that good stuff. And I think I'm going to leave it there. I know this was kind of like abstract and rambly, maybe not super actionable, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. I've been really enjoying Avatar. I'm excited to get to play a little bit more this week before I get really busy again. And I will have a more normal Rough Drafts episode for you next week. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on Blue Sky at sampratt.bsky.social. I'm on Discord at samp6, and I stream very occasionally at samp_mtg. Thanks for listening. See you next week.